Hi guys, Frankie B from Frozen Sand with a long, overdue episode of Behind the Scenes. It won't be an episode of Power Tools this time around. I do have planned, as per request, to follow up on some of the stuff I've been doing as far as working with the Genesis 3 DAZ Studio combination, as how to import some of the cool stuff that you can pull in from that application into Unreal 4, and how to go about doing it, which is kind of becoming a linchpin of how we're developing our characters as far as dressing up our character models goes. So I'll be getting into that at a later date, hopefully at some point. But as time permits, it's been a while here, and as you can see, I have a posting here done on the 30th of April, so it's been a while. Some interesting hardball questions, and I thought I'd go over these, hopefully in some sort of quick manner that doesn't, excuse me. Why is it every time I get the microphone turned on, I get the hiccups? I don't know. Anyways, I thought I'd go over some of the core questions here in quick successions, hopefully, and to kind of to primer the pump, so to speak. I'll just quickly go over some of the questions here. Will I be able to play this game as a standalone application? Will I be able to play this game without registration? Will I be able to play this game in Linux? Will I be able to run my own server that is not part of Steam or whatever? What is the extent of changes in terms of open source moving to the Unreal 4 engine, to the Unreal Engine 4? It should be Unreal 4 engine. It sort of threw me off. What maps will be included? Standard. What is the high-level status of the project right now? What are the most significant changes to gameplay compared to the legacy Urban Terror that you had to decide upon and admit to? Okay, so a lot of these, they're kind of hardball questions as far as being an individual. So to sign a kind of put on my anti-flaming suit here, so to speak. This will be as to the world of Urban Terror according to Frankie V. So these are a lot of this will be my impressions, and a lot of these questions should be asked in a roundtable format, but unfortunately, people are just a little too busy doing their things. Got people going on vacation, doing school, work, what have you. So, of course, based on the fact this is posted on April 30th, even my free time is somewhat limited to focusing more on getting stuff done as far as Urban Terror goes, rather than sitting around talking about it, which I would love to do all day, every day. But we'll start with, will I be able to play this game as a standalone application? And I don't see any reason why I couldn't, simply because I can jump on our master server directly from within the editor. So I'm not going to show you, of course, because it's an open IP at the moment. But if I wanted to, I could just drop the console down here and type open. I'm not going to finish off because it'll probably want to finish off by an IP address. I can open a channel to our master server and jump on there and start playing with it. Whatever happens to be baked. And as long as I, of course, have a mirror, an SVN mirror of the game, I could play it standalone without having to actually compile the game, so to speak. So I would see that as being if I'm assuming that's what you mean by being able to, I would assume, put it on a flash drive and being able to take it into work or school with you and put it on a network or what have you. Then that's something that's done currently. To kind of jump ahead here, we are looking at blueprinting off of the current Intech 3 URT version. That would be the roadmap. So if it's a question of, for the need of standalone, can we put it on a flash drive? Then of course that would be a desirable part of that roadmap. Of course, keep things as close to being the same as possible. Will I be able to play this game without registration? Well, registration now is kind of an opt-in thing. It really doesn't have any use beyond that, I would say, as to the meta gaming aspect of the game. There's no advantage or disadvantage of being a registration except for it is a server opted feature for making sure that they know who the players are, that somebody's not going to try to sneak in and use different names as to being banned or what have you, and then cycling through and yada yada yada. So how this would extend, of course, is our preferred platform will be Steam. So to be able to take advantage of a lot of the features that Steam has to offer, then of course, of course, the registration is required, particularly to take advantage of their anti-cheat systems or player friends systems, abilities, what have you. Probably somebody out there who would know the reason, some of the benefits of actually being on Steam better than I would be, and I actually think that we have more than a few on the team that are a little bit more familiar with this regards as to the advantages of registration. But in reality, if somebody decided they didn't, they're willing to open up a server that didn't require any kind of registration, and you would run a standalone game, then I don't, it can do that now. So I don't see there's nothing as far as hard-coded requirements that demand that this is what you are to follow. And of course, being a free-to-play game, as in a real free-to-play game, there's it really becomes about what the server operators want as far as protecting their own, let's say their own micro community, so to speak. So if we can add in something like saying that talking to the server operators, talking to them, if they say, hey, it's an opt-in feature, that's fine with us. Or if they say, we really need to have registration being reinforced, then we have to kind of listen to what they have to say more than what the average player would want or being able to take advantage of or not, whether they want to registration. Will I be able to play this game in Linux? Certainly, that's one of the preferred or planned platforms that for the game. As I said, current IDTech 3 /URT is the roadmap, the blueprint. So since we have Apple, or should I say Mac, we have Linux, we have Windows, but we can have a little bit more, whatever we can package this game to. It would be like a package project for Android, various different versions of Android. So I think a lot of this is, for a lot of different telephone systems, you're playing on a portable device or what have you. HTML5, so you can be web driven, HTML driven. Why anybody would want to play a first-person shooter in a web page, I don't know, but hey, we can do it. Of course, here's our Mac. They'll cook package for the iOS platform. I would assume this would also include the iPad too as well. I've seen Unreal 4 running on the iPad. Linux, of course, tvOS. I don't even know what the heck tvOS is, but you can play it on TV, on an OS system, on TV. Okay, Windows, of course, you have 32 and 64-bit, so these are the kind of platforms that we can register these to. Some of these, though, of course, as we've had offers and inquiries from let's say, named companies who want to help us out with, say, for example, the Android conversion, so to speak. But that's neither here nor there at the moment, as nothing's been agreed upon, so we can't really make that formal information. Just know that there is a little bit more interest out there of various different platforms than just us limiting to the popular three at the moment. That's the advantage of giving something away for free, so to speak. Okay, well, okay, will I be able to run my own server that is not part of Steam or whatever? Sure, I don't see why not. If you could do it now, then there's tons of servers out there that don't even send a heartbeat to our master server as part of support of these micro communities that are out there. And it's as strange as it sounds, there's a lot of communities that just don't want to get let's say, involved in the drama outside the game, and a lot of people just want to play the game. And this is actually supported by some of the more let's say soft numbers that we have access to, that says that tells us that there's a much deeper community going on here than just what's showing up on whatever master server happens to be operating at the time. So yeah, certainly we don't want ideally we would like to kick out the old engine, sliding in a new, and it's business as usual, carry on. kind of deal. So if you can run a server now, I would certainly support the idea of running your own being able to run your own a private server, so to speak. What is the extent of changes in terms of open source moving to the Unreal 4 engine? Actually, that's Unreal Engine 4. Okay, this is where we should be getting into something a little bit more as far as a roundtable discussion goes. But we've got to kind of make some assumptions here as to the term open source as it relates to a game like Urban Terror, which by definition is simply still to this day a modification of a game called Quake 3. So in actuality, the licensing that we fulfill as far as being able to produce a mod under the Unreal, the id Tech 3 engine as a mod of Quake 3 is actually limited by that license and not the open source licensing that people think about when they think id Tech 3 is being covered under GPL. Now, coming from the perspective of a content creator, in other words, I will freely admit that I have no concept or idealism as to what code represents as a form of art as it relates to open source. But what is factual is that GPL is not really what would be considered a true open source licensing. It's simply a licensing under a different format as to requirements. In other words, licensing in general itself is a means of conveyance as to how what is offered can be used. So the id Tech 3 engine in this example is not really open source, true open source, as it does have hard written out terms and conditions of how you can make use of it that is not really ideal as to our ability to produce a video game in the spirit of those who wish to play this game without having to worry about somebody using access to whatever is freely available against them and creating mods and hacks and whatever. Because as I mentioned, Urban Terror is a mod. So what you're in essence wanting to do is to take a mod and mod the mod. So that means taking it out of whatever it is that has been determined as a flavor of playing the game called Quake 3 in a different type of formatted gameplay. Now, if we were Quake 3, then it would be a lot more benefit and reasoning to be able to say, okay, we'll give you access to this so you can make changes or what have you. And we can really do that because we tried to, obviously what we tried to do was try to get a indie developer license from id, which kind of crashed and burned for a whole different story that we would sort of have to deviate from the intent here of answering this question. And it is simply a matter that the corner we kind of painted ourselves into doesn't really extend and change in the terms of open source. I really don't know the extent of that question, because you were dealing with game code as a mod, which also incorporates content, which is covered totally under a different licensing setup altogether. Code could be covered under copyright. It could be covered under patents. It could be covered under copyright, patents. Well, basically a lot of different things that are simply not compatible with Unreal 4, which we'll get into in a moment. And that's also we're talking about content. So, put into perspective, just because the game code has fallen under GPL at the moment, doesn't necessarily mean that we are required by that licensing to follow that licensing as being a mod of Quake 3. So our licensing requirements have to be filled by the licensing terms and conditions of Quake 3, not GPL. So this is where a lot of things get kind of confusing. And once again, I got to state that this is something that has to be discussed in a roundtable, because it's well, let's say we tried for 2 years. We've tried to find a way to being able to comply uh, with a lot of the different types of requirements that would be ideally suited for both sides of the equation. This is something that has to work for us, not only us, but for third party interests equally. To take care of what I would call as the common good, so to speak. So moving to the Unreal 4 engine, of course, you just basically toss the whole idea of GPL, this, that, and all that baggage that has accumulated over the last 18 years, and you take it and you toss it out the window. And instead of looking for reasons to say no, because to be honest, that's what it comes down to, is it's easier just to say no than it is to try to fight and work your way to being able to make a positive response of yes. So it's just easier most times to say, well, no, we're not interested in doing that, simply because there's just too much baggage piled on top of it. Where Unreal 4 engine, we're starting from clean. We made a lot of inquiries as to the terms and conditions of their fair use licensing, and it's probably one of the best that I've read. Usually the first thing we do when we're looking at something as far as a resource, as a new application, new programs, new asset requirements and acquisitions and what have you, the first thing we look at, of course, is their licensing terms and agreements, and whether or not it would, whether or not it has limited scope as to use, or is it covered under what would be considered fair use licensing. So the Unreal 4 engine license, as released by Epic, is what I would consider as being fair use, in that they don't really place so much, they don't really put a whole lot of limitations, and a lot of times what it does do is it encourages you to contact Epic and say, hey, listen, I don't know if this is covered by the licensing in some sort of language, hidden under some language or whatever have you, but here's what we need, here's what we want. Can you give us any advice as to correctly complying to the licensing agreement? And it's usually, it's really quick, boom. Usually I sent their licensing department a question, and they're usually quick to respond. I think the shortest was about 15 minutes. And the longest was about 2 days, and that was only because they were off at GDC or something like that. I can't quite remember, but they're pretty quick on responding as to our concerns as to filling in the proper licensing terms and conditions that makes Urban Terror truly a standalone game. So, of course, so if we're looking at the difference here, right, from the extent of changes in terms of open source moving to the Unreal 4 engine, we're going from what is a mod under Quake 3, and there will always be a mod under Quake 3, into a new engine that truly makes Urban Terror a standalone game, as to being, let's see, rooted in the core of the game engine, so to speak. There's a lot of finagling to making sure, because we, as I mentioned, we are licensed under how any other game mod would be licensed under as a mod to Quake 3. You're stuck there. You're stuck in a time machine. You're stuck in a 17, 18-year-old engine, and you can't make any changes to it that would break that compatibility. So if you have any engine that can run the Quake 3 game, will run Urban Terror, and that's the law. You can't change that. You can't make any modifications, any improvements, as we had done with as a preliminary with the FS Tech design, which was a huge jump in performance, but simply the whole licensing sort of just kind of fell apart. So unfortunately, id Tech or id software is no longer really id software anymore. So it's time to move on. And moving over to the Unreal 4 engine, of course, the first thing we wanted to make sure was cross compatibility with various different licensing agreements. Now, as it is, Unreal 4 explicitly excludes GPL licensing, because the purpose of GPL licensing is to be able to release a free version of a commercially available product. So Linux, which is what GPL was originally written for, is to ensure that the broad-based licensing fulfillments are so dispersed amongst a lot of different people that it wouldn't be possible for, say, Microsoft to come along and just buy it from a single source, from a single legal source, and make it their own, put it in a drawer, and of course that 15% of the Linux market, I think it's 15% or something like that, would automatically move over to Microsoft Windows. So that's the whole idea behind GPLs, to make free versions of commercially available products. OpenOffice is the same as Microsoft Word. GIMP is the same as Photoshop for all intents and purposes, and these are free versions of the game of these applications that above and beyond access to the source code itself. Now, that doesn't mean that the source code actually belongs to open source. What it means is you're free under the licensing terms and conditions of GPL to make use of it under those terms and conditions. It's still licensed. No matter, to me, open source means I give it to you. Here it is. Do whatever you want with it. I don't care. If you want to sell it, you want to bend, fold, and manipulate it and put it in a coffee can and bury it in the backyard. That's fine with me. To me, that's what the ideological representation of open source should be. But GPL is not open source. GPL is a licensing agreement that is at the best of times difficult to understand, and it's difficult to understand because it's based on the idea that it's not based on copyright ownership. How to put this in perspective? Let's say you make a birdhouse. You made that birdhouse. You own it. You own the wood. You own the nails. You own everything that's about this birdhouse. You own it until you conveyed the ownership to somebody else. Now that could be by contract. It could be what's called work for hire, meaning that somebody comes along and says, "I want you to build me a birdhouse, and I want to own everything that there is about that birdhouse, including the plans, whatever you come up with, including the wood and the nails and your effort. And here's how much I'm going to make. Here's how much I'm going to give you, and here's the contract that you're going to sign." And of course, somebody else now owns that and owns the rights to it, and you no longer do. Okay, so copyright, by extension, is the right that you can convey to somebody else to actually copy your birdhouse. So you could sell them the documentation and the blueprints, whatever it is, and the materials and whatever to make their own birdhouse, but by rights. And then of course you should be able to, of course, if it's your design, you own that right, and you own the right to allow somebody else to copy it, and that's where copyrights come into effect. So how GPL debases the copyright is by creating a much broader scope of ownership than that is limited to a single entity as work for hire. So in other words, Linux is actually owned by hundreds, possibly thousands of different individuals in the same manner, believe it or not, much in the same manner that Urban Terror on ITech 3 is owned by, everything from the coding and the content is owned by various different entities. It's so broad based that it literally would be impossible to make any changes to how things are done now as far as delivery goes. So okay, I think maybe that did I cover that enough as to ideological. Basically, open source doesn't really exist. Is what I'm trying to say, as in freely giving. There's always a but added to it, and as you read the licensing, I mean, if you have to read the licensing, it's not open source. It's just, that's the fact. It's just a different form of licensing. Where Unreal Force kind of changes that. That kind of paints us into a corner here with an 18-year-old game that has so much baggage piled on top of it. I think I kind of mentioned it. It's easier to say no than it is to try to look for ways to be able to say yes. And to be honest, we tried. Honestly to God, tried to find ways of being able to try to accommodate as many people as we could, but it can't be done. Sorry. Okay, so is the extent of changes in terms of open source moving to the Unreal 4 engine. So we covered what the kind of corner we're kind of painted into, hopefully in a logical manner, and of course from a perspective of content creator. And so you'll have to forgive me if you are a coding guru, and you probably know a lot more about the ins and outs of this than I would do. But the stuff I make is covered under a totally different licensing format called copyright, which can be applied to code, but in most cases it doesn't. It's in the same manner that content would be. Two totally different types of entities that sort of share the same kind of pathway concept, so to speak. But moving on to the Unreal 4 engine, well, the first thing that the world that opens up to us, of course, is access to MIT, and kind of get backed up here a bit. Under Unreal 4 engine, GPL is explicitly excluded from any kind of usability as to the use of code or content or releasing your game on their GPL, simply because it's not compatible with an Unreal 4 engine, which is of course a commercial product of a company. So the two, right off the back, the two of them are incompatible. Now unless of course you're making a copy, you're making a clone, like as in GIMP being a clone of Photoshop. You're going to make a clone of the Unreal 4 engine, then you can release that, of course, under GPL. But as it is, Unreal 4 engine is not compatible with GPL, so there's different licensing means to being able to include third-party sources that are a lot more diversified, so to speak. That gives us better options to say yes. Looking for the reasons to say yes, rather than defaulting to, of course, our usual normal no. So one of them would be, of course, is Creative Commons, which usually covers art, things like textures, materials, models, etc., sound, music, la-di-da-di-da-da-da, and of course MIT, which is more exclusively towards, I believe, coding requirements and what have you. Those are two that are exceptionally compatible with the Unreal 4 as to scaled types of licensing agreements. So of course our preferred licensing as far as Creative Commons goes is 0, meaning that here it is, do what you want to do with it, and that to me represents what would truly be an open source type of means of conveyance. So that's really what licensing and what have you is, just means of conveyance, being able to tell you here's what you can use it for, and here's what you can't use it for, so to speak. MIT, of course, I'm not a code person, so I'm not even too sure that MIT covers just code, but I've heard it being used in that context more than often than not. So once again, I'm assuming that there's different scales and different levels of licensing and use. Under Creative Commons, for example, somebody could say, okay, you can use it for anything but commercial use. Of course, Creative Commons 0 means, hey, free use to anything. You don't have to ask permission, you don't have to accredit, you don't have to do anything to it. You just can make use of it. After that, we have fair use licensing under Epic's terms and conditions, as if we had bought the asset from the marketplace. We do buy a fair amount of content from the Epic marketplace just to have core assets in hand. You don't want to some of the stuff that you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Say, for example, materials. We buy a fair amount of environment assets just to get walls and painted walls or what have you, in lieu of just doing asset flipping. We build everything from scratch, so it's so to speak. And then from there, I guess we can go to we have our own personal CA, contributors agreement, as well as an NDA agreement that has to be signed if you want to be part of the team. So if you don't want to be part of the team, if you don't want, and you want, we're interested in the idea of community sourcing. Somebody wants to make a gun, or they even want to make a custom modification to a now standalone game called Urban Terror. We can put things into into much more modular shape and form, as in, somebody can make a blueprint modification, call it zombie or whatever. They can send us over the core game assets to integrate it into the main build as a component under Creative Commons, with specific to the use of course, FS making use of that, but maintain the full rights as to the original source material. So if they make the zombie modification, they can just say, hey, here it is. I want to contribute to your project under Creative Commons 0, but I reserve full rights as to the original content, which I want to go over to Epic and sell it on their marketplace, and yada yada yada. So they don't. So they still have ownership of that, but allows us to be able to make use under fair use terms and conditions. The other one, of course, is if we happen to see it on the marketplace, we can say, and you say, hey, I made a mod. It plugs into any game. I made a zombie. We can buy mods off of the marketplace if we wish to, and integrate that into our game. So that's another pathway we can go to. The other one, of course, is to sign the NDA and CA. So membership, of course, has rights, which will give you access to literally open. I can't really call it open source. It's not fair to use that terminology in this context. It would give you the same access to open development of the project that anybody else on the team would have. So this would be assets and stuff that we purchase under license, and you can develop underneath the restrictions of contractual agreements of NDAs and this and that and the other thing. So and that's another reason why you probably won't see, you'll definitely not see the core of the game being made available as an open source, because there is a fair amount of licensed assets that are involved in the core engine design. So a lot of flexibility in that area, and I would say overall, the direction we're heading for, as I said, is to be able to say yes over no. So whatever you think that would be a fair agreement between crowdsourcing the game is something that we can kind of look at and look for reasons to be able to say yes. Somebody might say, okay, a good example of that is having pros joining on a team in the past, because the contributors agreement was written as work for hire. There was some concern that basically what I was saying was that anything that you made while being on the team belonged to Frozen Sand as to both ownership of the content and basically your life kind of idea, which was a boiler. Unfortunately, was a boilerplate. It was something that you can go out on the internet, and a company like Epic would have you sign as far as working for Epic for a paycheck. But since nobody works for a paycheck on a team, it's been rewritten as kind of donationware, where the original creator still maintains full rights to the content that they develop, excluding, of course, trademark materials. And if they wish, they could use Urban Terror the game as a test platform, so to speak, and actually make a sellable product. We do actually have at the moment developers on the team who are making stuff for the Epic Marketplace without having to include or exclude it as a part of the development of Urban Terror Resurgence. Sorry if I'm slowing down here a bit. It is a bit late, so but at least I'm not talking at high rate of speed I usually do. What maps will be included? Standard. Okay, well, I think we have Casa so far, Abbey, Casa, Abbey, Turnpike, and Uptown. Those are the 5 that I really feel comfortable confirming. We have various different other maps on various different stages of looking at it and going humming and hawing and what have you. Uptown, I believe Happy Day's working on that, so he's on again and off again. It's you see a lot of nothing being done for a while, and then all of a sudden, boom, a lot of stuff done in a short period of time. So that's coming along about as fast as say the other ones like Turnpike and Abbey and Casa. Those are the ones that I'm working on myself. But the plan is to release an alpha build of the game based on the current game physics, so that third-party mappers can get a jump start of actually building real-time maps that are suitable for Urban Terror HD. And did I miss a part of the question here? Let me take a look at this for a second. Sorry. Okay, something, a little bit of information here that I'd have to hold off until the last. Okay, what maps? So we want to get third parties kick-started. So the first watershed moment will be the alpha release for hardware testing and get that out as soon as possible. Even if it just barely works, which brings us to the other question: what is the high-level status of the project right now? Is, well, basically it's a functional game. It doesn't have the splash or the menuing systems. That's being worked on. Everything's kind of a modular. Like I think I kind of pointed it out. Like for example, this is the player models that we have 4 now. And it takes a lot of time and effort on the part of BK to make these player models. And this will eventually blow up into 16 player models. So these is being built as a part of a standalone project, as modular and away from the main build, which basically has a couple of player models that are standing in as proxies as we develop go a little bit deeper in this environment here without having to botch whatever the coders are working over there. So this will be ported over at a later date over into the actual game, which then of course, as to the question, is to the what is the high level status of the project right now. All of a sudden one day right now there's only 2 player models. One day there'll be 16. Boom. So that's the way things sort of it just sort of leapfrogs. You get a lot of time in between of nothing happening as to the standalone game, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a huge update that's pushed over from the different projects that are taking place all over our SVN, so to speak. But right now, you can actually play capture the flag. You can shoot people; they fall down. You can capture flags. You can accumulate points, as you would without the the useful, let's say, UI HUD elements that are in place. We don't have a mint map just yet, which is, but for the most part, everything that you would kind of see as far as the HUD goes in IdTech 3 is in place. So it would be difficult to tell that it's not really a game until, of course, you try to do something else. So that's the status right now. But I do expect that the other stuff will start to come online as standalone projects, like the character development package is introduced at a later date. It's all of a sudden things just sort of jump up to the next and level up, so to speak. And it's always something that's new. I can just go to the SVN and I can do an update. There's always something new that's been added. So it's an ongoing thing. Sometimes real slow. It may be a day, a week. I've seen like for a couple of weeks before something is updated, and then sometimes it's just in a day you get 2 dozen, 3 dozen updates to whatever it is that's been working on. So very, very interesting cycle as far as moving forward goes, so to speak. But as I mentioned, I hope I mentioned, first watershed moment, of course, is to release I would call it the hardware test, so to speak, as we did with the alpha for the FS Tech 1 design pathway to start getting back some numbers that actually makes over network playability. Okay, what are the most significant changes to gameplay compared to the legacy UT Urban Terror that you had to decide upon and admit to? I'll admit to anything at this stage. I don't think there's anything that we're particularly want to or are trying to hide. to a lot of us, Resurgence represents a higher level of transparency that most of us has experienced with Urban Terror on EdTech 3, simply because the fact of the matter is nobody really wanted to talk about the problems that were associated with working on it. It wasn't, no, it, at time, it's really hard to describe because it's it's really working on it. It's really not working on a game. It's what it is. A lot of maintenance work, and it's perseverance through frustration. That if you're testing, if you want to test yourself, you really want to suffer the pains of maintenance, so to speak. Then, of course, 4.2/3 is the game to work on for you. But so a lot of times that you just want, a lot of the problems that you are suffering through, you're banging your head on the keyboard, and there's a lot of frustrations, and when you fix it, you're glad it's done, you're happy you did it, you feel a high degree of success. I win over software, yay! And it is you are left with a sense of accomplishment, but it really is hard earned, and it just kind of grinds on you. So a lot of times people just simply don't want to talk about it. It's done, it's over with. Let's move on up. The most significant change, certainly as to legacy, is it's fun again. It's actually fun to work on this as a project, because you can do a lot of things new. You can fix stuff and it stays fixed. It does. Working on EdTech 3, it's like it's like having a hamster under the carpet. You're trying to bang down that little lump and it keeps popping up somewhere else. So in itself, it was an accomplishment, but it's something that you don't want to spend your entire life doing when there's something new and exciting come along. So as far as gameplay it goes, we're once again back to blueprinting off of the original game. There's nothing wrong with the way the game is now as to playability, to gameplay. I do know the coders actually sit there with the stopwatches and calculators and figuring out numbers. They're always going back to EdTech 3, checking the timing in Unreal 4, and doing a lot of number balancing for running and power sliding and jumping and wall jumping and what have you. There's been some added stuff that's been on. Let's say it's kind of been on the front. It's been on the burner for EdTech 3. Some really cool stuff as far as wall running. I think it really doesn't have a jump out. From what I've seen from the Play Blast, it really doesn't kind of jump out at you. But I do know when I play it, I can't jump worth a darn. But I do know the movement difference between EdTech 3 and Unreal 4, and Unreal 4 just has a nicer flow to it. I find it easier to jump, but I don't think it is a significant change as far as gameplay goes. Everything else is, as I guess I tried to mention, is that the ideal would have been to just kick out the EdTech. Oops, I actually tried to kick and I kicked the desk. The ideal would have been to kick out the EdTech 3 engine and slide the Unreal 4 engine underneath it and call it a day, and we'd be happy. Now, as a reflection on the past, the EdTech 3 version of Urban Terror is actually, it kind of holds up today in the year 2017, except for, of course, the technological changes and differences between what was available back then to what is available now. I mean, you could buy, under EdTech 3, you could buy a $1,000 video card and it wouldn't make a hell of beans difference. Where under EdTech, under Unreal 4, it would make a heck of a difference between playing on an older video card, which we're trying to maintain, versus somebody who's a serious gamer. I mean, a rock and roll star. That's what we want to see, is rock and roll stars of Urban Terror. These guys that go out and buy $6,000, $10,000 rigs and are serious competitors that will hopefully take the whole gaming aspect of esport environment to the next level, kind of thing. So I think I kind of covered what I want to admit to as well, in the same stroke there too. So I think that really covers here. I just kind of brush over this quickly. We'll be able to play this game in a standalone application. Is there anything else I want to kind of fill in here? Well, I guess that's really what all I really want to admit to at the moment. I'm going to try to get some of the crew together, do a roundtable kind of thing. So if we get at a later date, do a call out for some a few more mailbag interesting questions. We can make kind of a show out of it rather than me half asleep or tired from a hot day of work, and that would be a nice extension to this question up here. It originated it all is FS planning a resurgent Q&A session anytime soon. I guess that would be. So yeah, sure. If you have a question, by all means, post it on the forums, and and as long as we don't have to do a mailbag kind of session again, then as I try to hopefully install here is the idea that we're not trying to hide anything. There's no there's complete transparency as far as we can go with what would be of interest to anybody. I mean, if we want to talk about character development, player models development, I could do a whole show on that, just that alone. But we'll call this one done. We don't want to go. I don't even know how long I've gone on to. Anyways, I think this will be more than enough to call it an episode of whatever. See ya. Bye.